Painting models white has gotta be the trickiest thing in all of miniature painting. Typically, white paints aren't very good and take a lot of layers to get good coverage, but with that said, white models are incredibly striking as you really can't get any brighter than pure white. I have a whole gaggle of miniatures that all need white paint jobs, General Grievous and some clone commandos from Star Wars Shatterpoint, some Securitron robots from Fallout Wasteland Warfare, and a White Scar Space Marine from Warhammer 40,000. I'm gonna be doing a different white technique on every single one of them, ending with my preferred way to do white armor. Starting with the General, I'm gonna paint his armor up in the typical way, layering up paint one brushstroke at a time. I started out giving this model a gray primer. The color of primer is important. It can give you a leg up on the paint job. Usually darker colors if you want really harsh shadows, and lighter if the overall model is gonna be brighter. And General Grievous is mostly white, so a gray primer will help out. The first thing I decided to do was to paint everything that is not going to be white. I find it much easier to darken things than lighten them, so I want to leave the white armor for last. The gray primer is about the saturation I want out of everything that's not going to be white. On his base, I tried a thing where I carved some slashes into the base with my Dremel tool and painted around these areas with a line of red, orange, and yellow to make it look like General Grievous has made slashes through the statue. He hates Jedi so much that he can't even let the statue of a Jedi live in his presence. Once I had everything else painted, I used a little bit of black wash to pin shade some of the recesses in his white armor, letting this pool in the details. Any spot that got stained with the wash, I brought back up to the original gray primer. I put some white paint onto my palette and thinned it down with water so it was a little transparent. Glazing white is a little trickier than glazing with darker colors. White paint tends to be a little chalky, so slow and steady wins the race. I apply this to all the parts of his armor that face up, and so the first coat turns the armor from gray to slightly lighter gray, and it'll take as many coats as it's gonna take to get to pure white. Pretty much everything in the General is now painted, and the reason I did that first is because I only want to be able to mess up that white armor once. If I painted the white armor first and then painted everything, I probably would have spilled a little paint onto the white armor and then have to go back and fix it. So now it is time to work on that white armor. And he might look pretty white already, but actually if I hold up this paper towel, you can see the perfect white of the paper towel is actually quite a bit brighter than the General's armor. And I did that for a reason. I could have primed him white and then his armor would be white, but it would have no depth. I don't just want pure, perfect white armor. I want shades of white, shades of gray, if you will, 50 of them. And I'm gonna achieve that through lots and lots of thin layers. I kept layering and layering, depositing less and less white paint, so gradients started to form between the gray primer and the whitest highlights. And then I took a gray paint and I glazed this back in, emphasizing the transition and smoothing it out a lot. This gray paint just performs a little bit better than the white paint. Now General's armor is perfect, but actually in real fake life, his armor is slightly tan in color. And whenever I'm making an almost white or almost black paint job, I like to work in grayscale first, and then glaze the color on top. It just takes the color complexity out of the equation, while I'm doing the hard part glazing and blending. The great thing about this painting method is you have absolutely complete control, because you're doing absolutely everything yourself. Every single brushstroke is purposely placed by you exactly where you want it to go, and it gives you exactly what you want as an end product. With that being said, it takes forever. It really takes a very long time to layer up white until you get that beautiful crispness. It's probably worth doing on some one-off characters or maybe the heroes in your army, but really not something you can do over and over and over again. But speaking of a much easier white painting method, it's time for the clone troopers. The clone commandos are much smaller and simpler than General Grievous, and the perfect choice for a good 1-2 punch of base coat and a wash. I sprayed them with a white primer, and the white primer was still not quite white enough, so I sprayed them again with white paint. I want them as white as possible so that the wash doesn't darken them too bad. And speaking of that wash, I used Games Workshop Null Oil, thinned down 50-50 with Lamy and Medium, Games Workshop's contrast medium. This layered over top of everything leaves a nice crisp black line in every recess and detail in the clone armor, while doing very little to the large flat panels. While I was waiting for this to dry, I knocked out the bases, going with a gray for the metal and a bright orange for the land. With the armor dry, the clone is 90% finished. The only thing left to do is to get some black contrast paint in the in-between parts of his armor and his gun, and some fancy blue on his helmet, which for anyone who's ever played Clone Commando, the video game, you know that these commando helmets have a laser windshield wiper that cleans all the alien and battle droid guts out of their eyes. Those are some crispy, crispy clone troopers and incredibly simple. White prime, black wash. And it just works. That's why every game has a skeleton army, because it just looks really good. Now these guys are done. I could put them right on the gaming table right now, but another thing I could do because of that white armor is add a color. And that color is gonna put in some work because it is on top of white. It's like drawn with a big red Sharpie on a crisp white piece of paper. It is going to stand out. This is my favorite style of painting, when I can quickly and easily get almost done and then splash out on the finishing touches. A little freehanding of some fun colors, orange and yellow, will make these soldiers just that much more special to me. And some white sponging will make it more realistic. The paint is chipped down to the original white plastic, or plasteel as it is known in Star Wars speak. 2 models finished in record time. The white armor is there and it's perfect, but really, it acts as a primer for your eyes to be drawn to the color. And speaking of the color, these are very specific colors. Leave a comment if you're cool enough to know who these clone commandos are. Now, this is a recipe, and you can tweak it a little bit, but whatever you apply it to, you're gonna end up with pretty much the same results. But what if we completely change genres, Star Wars to Fallout, and completely change tools, brushes to dry brushes? These are Protectron robots from Fallout, and I primed them in black. Black because I want really harsh shadows. Dry brushing is a deceptively tricky technique. It requires exact right amount of moisture on your brush so the paint doesn't dry and start to come off as dust. The easiest way to do this is to periodically moisten your paintbrush. I do this with a little piece of foam and a bottle cap. I take 1 drop of water and squish it into the foam, and this can get the exact right amount of water back into my bristles. I put some dark gray onto my dry palette, which is the top of my wet palette, and then went to town on these robots. The bristles deposit paint but won't be able to get into the deepest corners of the model, leaving these spots the original black primer. I worked up from a dark gray, through lighter dark gray, through gray, light gray, and finally white, doing all the same dry brushing, leaving behind a little bit of the previous color each time, so a gradient forms. And all these layers of dry brushing leave behind a subtle texture that gives these robots a unique appearance. And if you want your war games to have a unique appearance, then our Patreon is for you. We have monthly terrain packs. This month is the Shipping Hub, a huge selection of huge models with a Titan-sized crane, working containers, elevators, and stairs. And if you always want to be up to date on the goings-on at Eons of Battle and be entered into our monthly giveaways, this month it's the Space Marine Spearhead Force. Follow the link in the description to sign up to our newsletter. These Protectrons are mostly white painted metal sheets, and on their joints I painted these with some blue paint to make them look a little bit more shiny chrome, and some black contrast paint on their noodle arms and legs to make them look like rubber. I took a small chunk of foam and sponged this all over the armor. Black will make for some very dramatic weathering. I painted the heads of these robots with some black paint and filled in some of the sponging chips to make larger scratches. And on one head, I made some fine lines over the face with some gray, as if someone has taken a shot at it. A gloss paint made these heads nice and shiny, and then it was time for some more weathering with pigment powders. I made up a nice thick slurry and put this over 50% of the model. Then, while it was still wet, I used a brush to push this into the cracks and crevices. With this model finished, I glued them down to the bases, and they're ready to wander the wastelands. I really like the dry brushing method for white paint, especially on models that I want to look a lot more realistic. Like, these models aren't necessarily realistic, but they're from Fallout. They're set in our world. A fictionalized, sillier version of our world, but essentially our world, and I think it really makes the models shine. Where with the Star Wars, I want something a little bit more fantastical, because Star Wars is fantasy in space, and so I think that's what makes those sorts of miniatures shine. But now it is time for my favorite way to do white paint, and to demonstrate, I'm gonna be doing it on a Space Marine. Why a Space Marine? Because it's what I do. I've kit bashed myself a White Scars Assault Intercessor, and I am very excited to paint him up and see just how good Space Marine armor looks in white. I started by giving this model a black prime, and then I gave the model a zenithal, spraying this really heavily until the entire top of the model was bright white. I see a lot of folks over zenithaling. I think a dramatic zenithal looks great. Don't be afraid to leave some areas black. It'll help the end product. Now the model is looking white. I made up a wash mixing Nuln Oil with Lamian Medium 50/50 and then just a dash of Leviathan blue contrast paint. The White Scars have clean armor, and I think a slight blue tinge will show that off beautifully. I gave the model a dunking of this and it perfected every little in-between part, crack, and crevice of the model. Now it's time for details, and my favorite details, decals. An assault symbol on the right shoulder pad and a chapter symbol on the left. I noticed the model was looking berry gray, so I did a quick dry brushing of white to brighten it back up a little bit, and then I painted all the red stuff. The Aquila knee and ponytail, a freehanding of points on the shield, and a scar on the face, very appropriate for the White Scars. And once I was happy with the red stuff, I spun some white paint over these areas to make them look battle damaged. Much like the clone troopers, I painted the in-between parts of their armor with black contrast paint, and the weapons I used rattling grime, which is my new favorite thing for guns. It gives them a slightly brown tinge that looks amazing with a dry brush of silver over it. I tried to get as many skulls as I could on this Space Marine, and all of them got gold paint. And although the White Scars typically have red eyes, I think that's a waste. Blue will be a much more striking accent color. Yep, I knew I would like the White Scars a lot. Also, always try to see if you can do a little something to customize your miniatures, because man, does this guy feel really special. I mean, it's just a normal intercessor. If I roll a 2, he dies. but man, does it feel special. A little Grey Knight weapon for the hand, an orc ponytail, a little shield I stole off a skeleton dude is all it took to make this guy feel amazing. Also, you've probably noticed that base. I had an idea of what I wanted it to look like in my head, and I am excited to see if I can pull it off. I want this base to look like a dried up riverbed. I glazed some brown over the entire base, and then I used a yellow to lighten up the cracked earth, and a brown to darken the earth around the stones. It was looking pretty good, but I need black in all those cracks, so I put some Agrax Earthshade over the base, which completely covered up all the subtlety of my base coats. You can't win them all. I finished up the stones and applied some grass tufts of varying sizes, and it was good enough. That Marine has got some serious kick. And all of these models are really different looking, although I've been using the same white paint for all of them. Army Painter White, pretty good paint. Just changing up the formula a little bit has led to a lot of really different looking models. I am a connoisseur of white armor. One of my favorite things in the world is Stormtroopers. In fact, little story about Stormtroopers. I love the game Star Wars Legion. I play the Imperials and the Rebels, but the Imperials are the cool ones. And I always plan on having 4 squads of Stormtroopers. So pretty immediately getting into the game, I bought a box of Stormtroopers. And then around Christmas last year, I noticed Amazon was having a really good sale on Stormtroopers, so I bought 2 more boxes. And then immediately I forgot I did that. And so recently I picked up another box of Stormtroopers. So leave a comment below if you would like to see a video where I paint a frankly absurd number of Stormtroopers. But now it is time to see what all of these white armored suckers look like together. The General, one of my favorite characters in Star Wars. I remember being blown away in 2005, and it was a treat to get this Shatterpoint mini all dolled up. He is big and a little tricky to paint with all those lightsabers and capes in the way, but his size helped a lot. The Clone Commandos are a wonderful unit because of how efficient they are to paint. They came together so quickly, and white armor is incredibly vibrant. Right now in Shatterpoint, there is only these 2. I hope down the line they come out with 2 more so I can have the complete Delta squad. Fallout minis are tiny, and that makes them fast to paint. On one of these Robco robots, I used gloss varnish before applying the weathering pigments, and I was able to get him a lot cleaner than the other. And I'm not sure which one I like more. I think they're both great. And of course, the White Scars, the Horde of Jagatai. These guys are one of the more obscure and rarely seen Space Marine chapters because of their tricky color scheme, and how bad bikes have been in 40k lately. I'm a Black Templar player through and through, but in an alternate universe, I would love a Scars army. White is one of those colors that when you can knock it out, it levels up your painting, because working in grayscale gives you a better understanding of value. Let me know which of these white styles is your favorite.